Mr. Hicks,
How you doing, Mario?
I'm good. How are you doing, sir?
Man, it's good to see you, man.
You too. You too.
Hey, it says that the host has stopped my video.
Yeah, that's okay. I can bring you both on once we start things up.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah, then you have a little privacy until we get started.
Okay.
She said, be honest with how you feel. I said, that's easier said than done. I said, don't worry about the future. She said, that's easier said than done. Well, it is. 'Cause true love, it ain't easy, no. She said, just show me this love is real. I said, that's easier said than done. I said, just trust the way you feel. She said, that's easier said than done. Well, it is. 'Cause true love, it ain't easy, no. True love, it's worth it in the end. Yes, it is. True love, it's worth it in the end. Yes, it is. True love, it's worth it in the end. It's worth it, darling. True love, it's worth it in the end. Ooh, it's easier said than done. Ooh, it's easier said than done. Well, it is. 'Cause true love, it ain't easy, no. No, no. True love, it ain't easy. True love, it ain't easy. It ain't easy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another Lunch and Learn. My name is Aaron Hicks. I am the reentry coordinator at Nehemiah. Um, man, it's going to be an exciting conversation, some dialogue and information for everyone to tune in. Um, grab your pencils, your pens, piece of paper, jot down some notes because we got good information for the community. We got some amazing guests here. We got Mario Koran. Alice Pauser. And this will be a great episode of Lunch and Learn. So without ado, we're going to jump right into it. And the title for today of this message is Locked Down While Locked Up. Is it torture? And again, it's locked down while locked up. Is it torture? And this is all pertaining to our correctional facilities here in the state of Wisconsin. And I just want to give some backdrop, some definition to this topic, because anytime you have to question if something is torture, I think it's our obligation to at least give some definition to what torture looks like and sounds like. So I actually looked it up, and it says the word torture refers to the intentional infliction of severe physical or psychological pain or suffering upon someone. It involves the use of various methods, techniques, or devices to cause extreme discomfort, anguish, or distress in order to extract information, obtain a confession, punish, or intimidate the individual being subjected to it. Torture is considered a grave violation of human rights and is universally condemned by international law. It is viewed as a cruel, inhumane, and degrading practice that undermines the dignity and well-being of the person enduring it. So I just wanted to give that information to all our listeners, to our panel, and so since we're here, let's jump right in, and I just want our panelists to just give a small snapshot of who you are and how your life has intersected with the criminal system. So let's start with you, Alice.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. And my name is Alice Pauser. My daughter, Genevieve, was convicted as nonviolent felon party to a crime when she was 18. She just turned 41. She's been incarcerated for 23 years. She's at Tachita Correctional Institute in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And for 17 years, I had a foundation called the Demeter Foundation, whose mission was advocating and educating for the humane treatment and civil rights of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women here in Wisconsin. I did sort of retire, and then now I'm back in it again, and I will be working with formerly incarcerated women. And I have to say that this conversation is so important, because in the last 23 years, I cannot tell you how many times that my daughter and I have experienced lockdowns.
Wow. And I'll ask that same question to you as well, Mario. Just give us a little snapshot of who you are and how has your life intersected with the criminal system.
Yeah. So thank you again for having me. This is it's great to be here. My first experience with the criminal justice system really was experiencing it from the inside out. That's not necessarily what brings me here today. I'll tell you, bring you up to speed. But when I was in my 20s, well, currently I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic. I was actively an addict and alcoholic in my 20s. Led to a lot of criminal enterprises. I was eventually convicted of a burglary for stealing liquor. I had broken into a bar and taken liquor. And so I found myself in jail. And really what stands out, I served a year in county jail in central Wisconsin. And really what stands out from that time is just this sense of complete powerlessness. Aside from being in jail, which tears at your dignity and dehumanizing, it's a traumatic experience. But just this sense that no matter what I did, people would not listen to me. You know, I had no power anymore. And, you know, along the way, I was let out during the day for a journalism class. Excuse me, I had Huber privileges, and I took journalism class. And when I did, I had experienced this, hey, maybe this is a way for me to ask those questions and to find some of that agency and to find some of that power. And I just really haven't looked back. Today, I'm a reporter with the New York Times, covering it this year, covering Wisconsin prisons all this year. Yeah, I've already got a story out, more on the way. But it just brings me a lot of satisfaction to be able to use some of what I've learned along the way to kind of pierce some of the secrecy and lack of transparency and bring answers, help bring resolution to people on the outside who are in need of that information, and on the inside.
Wow. Wow. It seems so surreal just because you actually did an article on me. And now I get to see you in the hot seat. So it's a little different, but I greatly appreciate it. Alice, I really want to ask you a question right away. Because you talked about your daughter being into Cheetah. And you said 23, is that correct? Years she's been
23
gone?
years this year,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So what is she saying as far as during this time, the changes that's taking place there at Cheetah?
Well, nothing really has changed there as far as programming, treatment of the women, the fact that it is excessively overcrowded, and the fact that lockdowns keep happening, well, for a variety of reasons, but a lot of the reason is the facilities being short-staffed.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess my question to you, I just wanted to kind of get a gauge on, you know, because she's been there. But I guess my question ultimately is it torture? And if so, why?
I believe it is, especially the lockdown and solitary confinement incidences. 93% of women that are incarcerated at Cheetah right now have a mental health diagnosis.
Mm,
So you look at the trauma before incarceration and now the trauma that they're having with these lockdowns. It's just, it's excessive and it's damaging. And personally, I believe that it is a torturous situation for the women that are trying to navigate this system at Cheetah right now. And you can look at it from the gamut of everything from healthcare issues to the lockdown and solitary confinement situations too.
thank you. Thank you. Mario, I want to ask you something slightly a little different. Because you wrote an article about the lockdown at Waupaun. But I guess what I still want to ask you, I do want to ask you about the article itself, what all you wrote in there. But I also want to ask, more importantly to me, is it torture? Since you have firsthand experience, so you let us know if it's torture, and if so, why?
Well, yeah. Okay. So just to give a couple of lines on what's happening at Waupaun. So Waupaun is going on 7 months on a lockdown, and the Department of Corrections might want to tell you, or it has said publicly, that it's not a lockdown, that it's a modified movement, but it's a men's prison, and the men in there, it certainly feels like a lockdown, and generally fits with what experts consider to be a lockdown. I mean, we're talking about 24/7 cell confinement, which is a marked change from past years. So when you're talking about conditions like that, and just by the way, if I can add, Green Bay is also on a similar lockdown or modified movement, as they call it, and just not those two. I mean, I haven't gotten to the bottom of how many prisons are on some type of modified movement, but I would say it's more than is publicly known. The question of whether it's torture, I think that we can look at conditions. I think that we can look at solitary confinement as a way of kind of gauging what men and women are going through in a lockdown. I mean, it's long been known. Research has shown that the permanent sometimes damage that solitary confinement can have, of that type of isolation, that type of stress. It can really trigger and exacerbate mental illness, especially if you're already experiencing those symptoms. And that type of isolation day after day, often when medications or mental health care is not being provided, I would say that it does tear at the dignity, and it's hard to argue that's not a form of cruel and unusual punishment or torture. And so I think that is my opinion, but I think it's backed up by what a lot of the research says. And I mean, I think many people on this call might be more empathetic than the general population, but I mean, if you're going to put yourself in a cell the size of a parking spot and not be able to get out, not be able to call your family, and with the day-to-day stressors on top of that, of being in prison and feeling unsafe, it's only a logical person would understand that that's going to tear at the mind and the fabric of a person. And to me, it constitutes torture.
Yeah, definitely. Man, I kind of wish we almost had one other person on here, because something that you said that struck me, and I'm just curious, being in these types of situations and for long periods of time, I guess my question or my thought, and maybe one of you can chime in on it, but what is happening to their psyche? Because that's got to be deteriorating. It has to be. It's no other way, because it's like you're not moving. You're not going anywhere. You're just you're seeing the same thing. There's no movement whatsoever. Can either of you expound on it?
Since I, have worked with the women's side, you can see physical changes in women when they're in this situation. I went to see my daughter, and she looked pale and thin and non-communicative, and so solitary confinement and the overall lockdown situation is problematic mentally and physically. And I think a good example of that is when the woman was murdered at Tachita on July 19th, and everything went into lockdown. Something happened with the emails that they were supposedly bucketed, and because people were trying to screen them. And so a lot of the emails were not getting to families, and we weren't able to really find out what was going on. And then last month, there was a whole bunch of emails that got released, and I received one from Genevieve during lockdown in July that said a woman had been killed. And I thought it was a second woman that had been killed. And so myself and other family members were getting these types of email that were held during lockdown. So it's not just the inmates, it's the families that are, affected by this too.
Yeah, definitely. I totally understand that. And I know that this to be true. Because a lot of times the family is the very people who get forgotten about, as if they didn't go through it with you. But I'm just wondering, I just know that the mental health inside of there has to be, man, just out of control in there. So what do we do? Mario, I know that you do a lot through your writings, and so how do we hold the powers to be accountable for these situations? How do we get people out of these torture chambers? Who needs to hear? And what do they need to hear to change the dynamics of these situations?
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback also on that last question, uh, what's happening to the psyche, or at least it seems to me from being somebody that's getting a lot of emails from men who are in Waupaun and in Green Bay in this situation in lockdown. I mean, this is the emails have become increasingly desperate. There's men that tell me openly that they're losing their minds, that they feel like it, that they can't find any relief, that that they're either threatening, they're either cutting themselves, they're seeing the person across the hall, or from a different cell cutting themselves, threatening self-harm. And there's been 2 suicides in Waupaun. So I think we can since the lockdown has started. So I think we can safely say that this is really tearing at the people who are in there. I think
Definitely.
that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I jumped on this story when I did, is because if mental health care and medical attention is so bad, if people are so desperate to get that they're threatening self-harm, that they're threatening to commit suicide, there's a humanitarian crisis happening. In terms of how we hold the powers accountable for this, one thing that I've been really surprised at is that there has been a lot of traction around this issue. There was a protest this week in Madison that some of you may have been able to go to. There's been a lot of news stories about this, and it seems to be working. I mean, I know that there's lawmakers that are hearing from these families. I believe at the event this week, there was 54 legislators who agreed to meet with families who came to the Capitol. And even if nothing directly happens as a result of those meetings, that's contact, and they're hearing it and they can't ignore it. And so I think when there's collective action in this kind, which can be sparked by a news story, but it doesn't have to be. When there's noise, when there's meetings outside of the Capitol, protests, it makes those in power very uncomfortable, and they can't help but listen or do something, even if it's just to stop people from making noise. And so it might not feel like there is anything changing, and it probably isn't changing fast enough, but I just see from what's happening already that is a path forward, and it is something that can work if people sort of join up and make a collective voice like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your thoughts, Alice? I mean, you hear what Mario is
Well,
saying. Go ahead.
It is so important that families start getting together in numbers and approaching legislators and going to the press and talking to media, so that this keeps in front of the public's eye continually. Traditionally, as all of us know, is that there's never been a whole lot of light shed on these issues, and it's so important that people are talking to their legislators to let them know. And with these lockdowns, as we've said, the families are frantic. If I don't hear from my daughter for a few days, I cannot tell you. It's just constant worry. And just to give an example, when the lockdown, after the murder of the woman, the inmate at Tachita, there was some new women that came in that had no way of contacting family members
Yeah.
who were hearing about this on the news. So, that's a whole different thing right there.
Mm, mm. So heavy. So heavy. I just been thinking, like, I'm wondering, like, because sometimes you have people and families who don't know what they don't know, right? Um, and how do we create a bridge to to increase a way in which families do know, they are informed, and they do know how to go about accessing uh, and really getting the ear of our legislators, because a lot of times people don't feel as if they're hearing. And every time you hear about a young lady or a young man passing away inside a prison and it could have been stopped, um, sometimes, Mario, it feels as if it's not moving, and it is going on deaf ears because it's not moving fast enough. Um, I think about all the people who, during COVID, uh, we could have totally stopped a lot of that. And we make sound choices not to. And I guess in a very real way, it's my lack of understanding to why. Why is it like that? Why do we have um, passionate reliefs, yet we don't use those? It's almost like anything to do with harming or hurting a person, we go the extra mile. But if it's anything pertaining to relief, it's almost bucked against. And ultimately, what you're seeing, which is even more mind-boggling, is you're seeing crimes being committed by the very people who's supposed to be watching over and supposed to be keeping things balanced, and it's not being balanced out. So it's a tall order, man. It's a tall order. I'm frustrated. Um, I'm frustrated because I feel like the powers that be is not putting a stop to this. I am in total agreement with you, Mario. We do have to keep making noise. We have to keep talking to our legislators. We have to keep talking to each other, keep this conversation going, because we don't want this to die down. This is real live, real people, and very real situations, and it depends on us to continue to keep pushing the envelope until someone is willing to hear the travesties that's taking place.
Yeah,
Yes,
Aaron,
Alice.
I'm so glad that you said that about the families. Over the past 23 years, what I've observed and actually experienced is that during the court process, when people are on trial and then the sentencing comes, families are so afraid and so traumatized that they don't know where to go. So they just kind of hunker down and wonder, where am I going to get help? Who can I talk to? And I think that's why it's so crucial for organizations like Nehemiah and Expo and Free, Reclaiming Women's Freedom are so important, so that families need to know where to go to get support. And it's my opinion that as part of the public defender's responsibility for resources, that they should be handing families resources and saying, this is your next step, contact this organization, learn how you can get support. Because over the years, all of the families that I've known have been just terrified to speak up about anything.
Have you experienced the same, Mario?
Yeah, I mean, I think when there's when a family member of yours, if you're directly impacted by justice, I mean, there might be a little bit of shame. There might be a little bit of shame of what that person was convicted of, speaking about it publicly, thinking that nobody will support you, kind of thinking about the perceptions about, who goes to prison, who goes to jail. That might keep you from reaching out and speaking out. But I mean, I think that there's a couple other issues at play, if I can add. I mean, the Department of Corrections is an enormous agency, right? Government department here in Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
One of the biggest, right? It's a monstrosity. And yes, there is absolutely a lack of transparency. I know Kevin Carr, Secretary, Department of Corrections right now, has pledged and pointed to things that he's done to increase transparency, but it certainly doesn't feel like that to families involved. It certainly doesn't feel like that to me as a reporter. But I mean, in a sense, that's what government agencies do. Left unchecked, they're going to operate in the way that they that serves their interests, right? And that's just what happens when there's not powers that are keeping them in check. And so at the same time, I have to call myself out as a media, as a representative of the media. I don't feel that media has done a very good job in keeping the Department of Corrections in check in the past couple of years. I mean, there's been cuts and cuts to not to remove the responsibility, but there's been cuts and cuts to newsrooms. And one of the casualties of that has been fewer eyes on the Department of Corrections, among others. So left unchecked, it's going to grow, and that transparency is going to grow. It's just like a natural law of the land. But one other thing that I think would help, in addition to increased press, is what it seems to me as an outsider, or kind of an outsider, is that there's a good number of community groups and people who are supporting reentry and supporting people in prison. But there seems to be sort of a fracture between those groups where there's not a lot of collectivity between all of between all of the same interests that could be. And if there was a better way, so you might talk to Nehemiah, but you don't know what wisdom is doing.
Right.
So there's just, I believe if there was more of a coming together of sharing of information among the affected population, there would be more numbers and the voice might have greater power. But those are just a few things that stand out, but those are all things that can be checked. Those are all things that can be improved on. There's just a few observations I had.
I love that. I love the fact that you called us out as a community, as an org. I love that because what you're saying is it's something so simple, but it's very real that it takes a village, right? It takes all of us. You know what's interesting? When you said that, Mario, my knee-jerk thought to everything that you were saying is that what winds up happening is everybody's fighting for the same, just for a livelihood to live, right? And so, again, like was trying to convey before, it's just interesting to me whenever it is time to help people, resources are scarce, right? But when it's time to lock people up, we have more than enough resources to do that. If we need to go to war, we have more than enough resources. And it's just interesting to me, those dynamics of how we are wired and how do we determine who funds what, and we fight against this funding. One of the things I can share with you is this on my end. So currently I've been doing work with the UW, with UW Extension. Most people don't know that those are very different. And then with a lot of different things with the community. But in all of the above, it's all about collaboration. We have to start working together on these issues, and we have to start moving collectively together. And to the point that you made, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that sound is a lot louder. It comes with a lot more force and power when we move collectively. But again, I do strongly believe it's going to take people who have been impacted to take the lead on this, because we understand the heartbeat of the issue. I do also understand that just reentry in itself is lucrative. So people just jump in for whatever reason, right? To make some money or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, if it's about changing lives and, getting people to hear us, we will have to move collectively. And I'm in total agreement with that. And I greatly appreciate you calling that out, Mario. I'm just going to jump right into the Q&A real quick because I have a question that just popped up. And this comes from Rachel, but she said, what would you recommend as a solution to the problem long-term lockdowns? Hiring more staff or reducing the prison population? Seems like two options. Maybe there are more. I'm interested in what I can ask my legislators to do after being inspired to call today. Thank you for that, Rachel.
I think it has to be a combination of more qualified staff and reducing the population as well. There's been such a tremendous turnover in staff as far as correctional officers go. And I know that at Tachita, they're short-staffed. And so I think the way that I see it is that the Department of Corrections needs to be listening to the correctional staff about what their needs are and how they can be supported in doing their jobs and getting adequate staffing going on. But I always, over the last 20 some years, I always look at it from the fact that we are incarcerating more people with mental health challenges and addiction challenges and putting them in the prison system rather than getting them treatment. And I think that we're going to have to take a hard look at our community health systems so people can get that help so that they don't go in and they don't keep going in. And it's a double-edged sword. Both things have to happen.
Absolutely. What's your thoughts, Mario?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with Alice. I think that there needs to be a combination of things. I mean, you're talking about prisons like Waupaun, that's where 53% of the positions for correctional staff are vacant, right? So they're running prisons with less than half staff, and who pays? They cut programming when that happens. So the people who are incarcerated pay because they get fewer educational opportunities, they get fewer family visits. That's the way it plays out. Now, there's been a lot of movement in the past year to increase that pay for correctional officers. I think at some prisons, it's up to $33 an hour now, or maybe more than that at some prisons. But that's going to take time. Whether or not that's the solution or not, it's going to take months to train those people, recruit them, and put them in for anybody to feel relief, including the correctional officers who are there. So I think that's been a lot of the legislators' focus over the past year in trying to kind of grapple with this problem, is thinking about how are we going to recruit, how are we going to raise pay. But the question is whether that's really enough, right? Because we've kind of been here before, and this is the result. This has been a growing problem, this growing sort of short staffing. But what is the other side of that equation in reducing the prison population has yet to even be grappled with, really. I mean, we're talking about systemically making it tougher and tougher for men and women to get out through the earned early release program, or just the truth in sentencing, which has kept people in longer. So we're doing all these things that are keeping people incarcerated for longer periods of time without looking for any sort of relief valve. And so we know, I guess, and this would be the ACLU's position when I talked to them for the story, that if you're talking about people not getting programming because they're short staffing, that's not their fault. They have nothing to do with that. And you're not absolved of responsibility by saying that it's a staffing problem. You have to fix that. These are people in your care. These are people in the custody of the state. And so you would seem like you would have to explore ways to reduce the prison population. And I think COVID, it was a long experiment and a pretty ugly experiment, but I think COVID had showed us some of what can work, what might work, releasing people convicted of certain crimes, somehow finding ways to get in realistic and logical ways of reducing that population. Because if you can't fix the staffing problem or fix it quickly, you have to do something, because what is happening currently is not sustainable for anybody, for the men and women who are incarcerated, for their families, and for the people working there. So that's my stance.
I love it. And I believe I would echo that, what both of you have brought to the table. I struggle sometimes, and this is just more personal because of my experience. I struggle with knowing that the agenda is not to correct, or those are not the agendas. Like, it's like these play on words almost, as if the agenda is to rehabilitate and correct these behaviors, and that's not really what's happening. Um, and so in one breath, I'm thinking like, okay, you can hire more staff, but it was something that you said, Alice, that really struck me. It was just one word, and you said qualifying individuals. That's interesting verbiage to me, because to me that indicates that there's a lot of people that's working there that's not actually qualified to be there, which we know when we see deaths and people ignoring certain things, telltale signs that people are struggling and we not assisting with that. So
Well, and in a rush to hire, no matter what industry it is, it's just bound to happen that unqualified people are brought in to the mix. And I want to say too that I know people that work in the Department of Correction Systems that are correctional officers that are amazing people and that do their jobs every day and are there for the right reasons. And when you don't have enough staff and you start telling seasoned, responsible correctional officers that they have to start stacking shifts, that is going to be a huge problem because people burn out. So then you lose long time people that have been working hard in this system. So it's just hard right now for
and not
everybody.
and keeping in mind they have a very high suicide rate amongst correctional officers. So I have a couple of more questions for you guys. Just came through. One is, are you able to define staff shortage? For example, 3 more, 4 more. I'm speaking to individual correctionals. So how I'm understanding it is just, what does that look like, and what will fill in the blanks? Is it 3 or 4 more staffs, or is the issue much greater than that? And that's for either one of you.
Sure, I can take the first crack at it. So the Department of Corrections gives extra pay. So the threshold that the Department of Corrections sets for short staffing is 40% vacancy rate. So if there's a prison with a 40 per institution with a 40% vacancy rate, people who are working there get extra pay, sort of battle pay. So that's, I guess, the very sort of broad threshold is 40%. Now, the reason that's not quite as specific or helpful as you might be looking for, I mean, you ask a good question. What does that mean? 2, 3, 4 more people? It's actually really hard to say that from the outside. One of the things that we don't see with those numbers, when we're looking at a 40-50% vacancy rate, which is bad enough and looks bad enough on paper, but it's just an abstract number. And it doesn't show us what that means inside a prison on any given day. When when somebody 2, 3, 4 people call in sick because they can't get a day off, so they call in sick and they don't show up. Do you have one correctional officer for 400, 500 people?
Wow.
We hear stories of that happening, but we don't have the full picture because the Department of Corrections is not providing the full picture. And because we're not pushing hard enough, I'm talking about me as a reporter and my colleagues, we're not pushing hard enough for those answers. So that's one way of looking at it, the 40% number, but I think you're asking a good question that would take a little bit more work by all of us to really get to the bottom of.
I totally agree. My daughter has said that in areas where there used to be 4 to 5 correctional officers in that particular space, that oftentimes there's only one now. And that's not only dangerous for the women if something would happen, if they have a medical emergency or a fight would break out, but it's also unsafe for the correctional officer themselves.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they cannot do their job if there isn't enough staff. So that must be pretty upsetting for not just the staff, but the women too, because they're in that position where
Yeah.
if something happens and there's not enough staff to help.
Yeah. Yeah. Because yeah, no, that's very real, because and that's probably why you always find them on lockdown. And that's not saying that it's okay, but I can totally see, because I mean, you can't control these situations. You can't control absolutely nothing. Only thing you can do now is just lock people in cells and keep them in there.
Yeah.
One of the questions that's being asked is, what are the requirements, state statute, guideline, if any of the state to provide mental health services to incarcerated people, especially given the significant mental health needs and trauma history of so many?
I would say that the best way to find that out is to actually look at the specific statutes, and those have to be provided to people, and they should have access to that, and also access to the Department of Corrections policies and procedures, because over the years when I have looked at that, there's gaps between that and what's going on with state statutes, big gaps, and that really has to be addressed.
No, you're 100% right. But I guess what I'm not understanding, and please help me, because I'm trying to get there as well. With every listener, I'm trying to get there. But like, how do you put? I guess I don't know if I'm wording it right, but I'm trying to convey, like, how do you hold their feet to the fire? I'm really understanding, because it's like, this is just in a very real and just simplistic way. I feel like the law, statutes, all of that is out of the window. Nobody's even abiding by that right now. Like, the law has been broken beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's just my personal opinion. I'm not saying I'm right, and I'm not saying I'm wrong, but I just strongly believe, based on these circumstances, based on the lack of hires that they have there, their inability to just, people can't move around, they can't do anything. I'm beyond a shadow of a doubt, crime is being committed because, I mean, nobody's seeing therapists, they don't got none of them. And they don't have enough anything to do anything. So I guess I'm just really trying to understand, like, at what point, what needs to happen for somebody to say enough is enough. But I got another question that I want to throw in here. It says, I do not believe there's a this or that solution to this issue. I think it requires both and approach. How we do put forth a message that sustains the interest of the public, and what do you think the media can do to support this cause? That sounds like that might have been shifted towards you a little, Mario. And I can read that again if you need
Yeah,
me
could
to.
you read it again?
It says, and this might be more of a statement, but let's see.
It's not an either or. Yeah.
It says, I do not believe there is a this or that solution to the issue. I think it requires both and approach. So the question is, how do we put forth a message that sustains the interest of the public, and what do you think the media can do to support this cause?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm currently thinking about and currently grappling with, because it's, as a reporter, I'm always thinking, how can I make this story clear so that the public can take away the most important piece of information? What is it that I want them to understand? Um, One thing I want to say, just to kind of put out there, is that we are in a very difficult time in Wisconsin in particular for criminal justice reform. I think that it's maybe getting better. I think that there was a time, talking about Obama era years, where there was more bipartisan, and even after, bipartisan support for these types of things, reducing prison population, fair sentences. And for a multitude of reasons, especially in Wisconsin, that shifted around election time. And we started to see more tough on crime rhetoric, where it became very politically popular, to sort of just demonize people in the criminal justice system. And I think we're still kind of in that climate in Wisconsin, or even some of the lawmakers who would typically be, this is just my opinion, would be more sympathetic, have sort of backed away, and been less forceful and been less vocal about those things. So I do think that this collective action media coverage, it can shift that, but I do think that that's part of the backdrop here in Wisconsin. One of the things I struggle with is what happened on Tuesday, and this often happens, is it's not, so there was a protest this week, right? Number of people showed up, a couple hundred people showed up to Madison, and it was about the lockdowns, but it was about a lot more than the lockdowns. So people were talking, there was be a speaker that would talk about these lockdowns are inhumane. The next person would talk about, we need to get rid of crimeless revocation. We need to look at the probation and parole system. We need to look at truth in sentencing. And so all of these things are connected, and all of them are important. But messaging wise, it's like, that's too much to take away in any, that's too much, maybe, I don't know. It's too much to maybe take action on if you're hitting all things at once. And so I don't know, I'm not saying this is the way to go, but I often wonder if it's more effective to take a single issue and to hammer on it and to talk about its impact and to try to drive change on that. And when you do, take the next one. And so I don't have a prescription for this, because I don't work in the sort of the public relations side. I'm not a community organizer, that type of thing. But I think me as a reporter, that's what I try to do. I try to isolate an incident or try to isolate an issue, do as good a job as I can explaining why it's important, and then move on to the next one. What we can do, I think, and I think Alice said it, is just speak with reporters. Not every reporter is the same. You may have some from different backgrounds, from different news outlets, but the stories that you tell us are sort of the currency that we have. And if people are reaching out to me, which they do, and telling me these stories, I hear these things and I can ask questions on those behalf. So that is one thing that you can do to help. And I think we as reporters need to do a good job of being serious about the information that we're getting, and being serious about our jobs, and doing everything that we can to get this information to the public.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I have a question actually asked to me, but before I say that, my thought is, it was a thought that I just wanted to convey. What's so interesting to me about a lot of this stuff is, um, like all of these connections. You're right. You're right to what you just said, Mario. We do have to find one specific thing, attack it. It shouldn't be like that, but it's almost like it can get the waters become murky if you don't do it that way. Um, because then you're all over the place and you have no specific target that you're aiming to. So I can totally see that, to what you're saying. So here's the question that was asked to me. What is my position when it comes to the lack of participation of the Black church specifically on these issues? And you're more than welcome to chime in as well. But I would just say that collectively. I don't think it's a black church or a white church. I think this is all churches' issues. And so I strongly believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it is their obligation as well to participate in this, and coming up with strategic ways to change these dynamics. Our churches are very influential, and for them to be on the sideline around these issues just wouldn't seem right to me in any way, shape, or form, because of what they bring to the table um, and their ability to also message things as well, to their congregation. So I strongly believe we need all hands on deck, period. Like, this is not okay. People should not be living in these kind of conditions. And we need an all call from everywhere. We need people from everywhere, every background, all race, color, creeds. But this is not okay. And this is not the Wisconsin that I believe anyone wants. And I think we can do better. I know we can do better. But I would ask you, Alice, what is your position on the church, and do you feel that they are engaged?
I think that all faiths provide a level of comfort and grounding for people and families that are going through this, and that Aaron, is such an integral part of healing and support for everyone. And I think that it is the base of where the communities start building support for people that are incarcerated and for people that are coming home as well. And I just wanted to say quickly about something that Mario said. Families are afraid to speak out many times and talk to the press or other people for fear of retaliation on their loved ones. That is a huge thing, and it's a reality for families. And that, I believe, is why a lot of the word doesn't get out, is because of that fear of retaliation on their loved ones. And I have felt it. I mean, and I know other families that feel this as well, as I can't say anything because something will happen to my person. That's a real fear.
Wow. Wow. Did you have a thought as far as the churches throughout the community, Mario? How can they be used in a means to help?
Yeah, just real broadly. I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert. I don't have a lot of direct experience, or I'm not an expert in with Black church. But I know that Black churches have played historically a huge role in social change, and it may not be fair to just kind of chalk that up to Black churches when you're talking about white churches. Although, there are figures, especially there in Madison, Pastor Alex G. Has been doing a lot of this work for years, right? And I know that he's been very receptive to me, and he's given out these messages. So that our church is doing that work, and it shouldn't fall on one denomination, shouldn't fall on one type of church. Yeah, I guess that's as far as I have. But no, I just want to also touch on what Alice said. And that's something that I've heard from so many families, a lot of families, that they're afraid that they're going to be retaliated against. And that's valid, absolutely. And I would just recommend that if you do want to speak with press, find a reporter who you trust, who you believe is going to keep their word. And if you tell that person, look, you can't put this in my name, you can't attribute this information to me, in that reporter you trust, they will do that. And that will keep your name out of it. If you can just share the facts, it can be done in a way, with a thoughtful approach, in a way that doesn't have to name you or even put you in the middle of it or your loved one. So there are ways. Yeah.
And I just want I totally, when you started to say that, all I could think of is to say to the people, I mean, you want to find Mario and you want to find someone with his characteristics, because everything that he's saying, he did it. He did it in my life. So I can attest to the fact that he moves with integrity. And he's gonna give you the real, and it ain't gonna be nothing, no more, no less. It's always gonna be the real. So I just want to put that out there, and I want to give you guys, we're coming to an end, but I definitely want to give each one of you a final thought, um, as far as this torture chamber that these people are going through, and what we can do to help support those individuals in there, um, or whatever final thoughts you may have. So, and whoever wants to take off can, please.
Well, I think that the most important thing for myself and for people that I've dealt with the last 20 plus years is to be vigilant and to keep it in the public eye as much as possible, and learn the rules and regulations. If there's reports that the DOC is required to put out, take a look at those, find out what's going on, but stay vigilant, and rely on each other in the families and the organizations in the community that support us, to help make sure that our loved ones and friends that are in the system are treated decently and humanely.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, just one parting thought that I would like to share, and thank you, Alice, is that I would just like to stress that if you're listening to this, you have more power than you think you do. Easy to feel dehumanized. It's easy to feel tiny and small up against this massive system. But when you are armed with the facts, when you have documentation, when you've done your homework, it's much harder to ignore you. It doesn't matter if you're a convicted felon like me. It doesn't matter if you're in jail, in prison, if you're outside with a loved one. If you have those facts, it's much harder to deny you. There's more power in your collective voice than you think there are. And the last piece, I guess, is that there's power in telling your story. This way of becoming a reporter has been kind of my way of taking ownership and learning to tell my story. But along the way, what I found much more satisfying is helping others tell their story. And people like Aaron Hicks, right? And people like Mr. Hicks, who, shared with me. And I don't consider it me telling his story. I consider it having been honored to help him tell his story. And I think that he's gone about in the years since helping other people do the same thing. And so it's a transformational thing. It's a transformative thing. And through this act of witnessing, through this act of storytelling, we can take ownership of that. And we all have the power to do it. So I would just encourage you on your way.
No, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to you, Alice, big time, because you've been doing this, man. You've been doing this for a while, and even when you call yourself getting out of it, you still find yourself back in it.
Yeah.
But that's where your heart is, and we greatly appreciate you and thank you, Mario. It's been a pleasure, man. I'm glad to see you, to see your face. And to all our listeners, man, I really, really hope you've taken something out of this, because this is huge. Our next Lunch and Learn will be November 16th, and we will be discussing reimagining the Dane County Jail, or imaging the Dane County Jail and the outcome. So that will be our next Lunch and Learn, November 16th. Again, thank you to all our listeners. My prayers that each person has got something out of this. And I will just leave you with this, that one can put 1,000 in flight, but two can put 10,000 in flight. So as long as we work collectively, we can make the change. So let's make the change. I want to say thank you again, and we signing off.